Hey guys, welcome into the Bear With Us podcast. I'm Jack. He is Frank. We're not talking about the Super Bowl today because we got a whole 2 weeks to go before we get to
Yeah,
that.
fuck.
This is a rough week, but we'll just treat it like a bye week, like any other bye week where no teams are playing except for the Pro Bowl, and you have a bunch of random people in the Pro Bowl who shouldn't be in the Pro. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, but. We got some things to discuss. Frank, before we talk a little bit about the Bears, I did want to start in just kind of the broader NFL because there was a ton of news that just kind of came through this afternoon. And some minor stuff as well that I found interesting. So let's start with the biggest one of them all. The Denver Broncos are trading for Sean Payton to be their head coach. They gave up, I believe it was this year's first round pick that they had from San Francisco, which was originally from Miami or something like that. I don't know. It's all over the place. So they trade like the 28th pick and then a next year's second, I believe. Or maybe it was I don't know. They traded a first round pick for Sean Payton, basically.
I think it was a first and a second. I think it was this year's first and next year's second.
Which they've already traded a lot of picks for Russell Wilson. So this team better hope that this is that Sean Payton is the missing piece. Frank, what do you make of the Broncos kind of making a big splash in terms of trading for a head coach and trading a first round pick to do so?
So it felt like with the rumors and everything that the writing was on the wall that this was going to happen. It felt like the only realistic destination outside of maybe Carolina, but I just felt like there was too much up in the air there. And it reeks of desperation to me. No,
oh, yeah.
You have a new ownership group. You got in a brand new quarterback who you paid a lot of fucking money to stink up the joint. But then that thought of mine sort of was confirmed when the report immediately after they traded for him is that they tried to get DeMeco Ryans. Like they were like really pushing hard to get him before. I mean, he went to the Texans. We'll get to that in a little bit. But that was just like, yeah, this is an ownership group that thought, getting Russ, getting Nathaniel Hackett was going to be like the solve to any sort of problems that they could forecast. And it wasn't. So now they're sort of doubling down on that by getting Sean Payton. And my initial thoughts is like, I just don't think Russ fits that kind of offense. Like, again, we gave Pete a lot of shit for the way that offense looked with Russ, but I think it had to look that way. Like, I think just Pete knew what he was doing. And I mean, we'll see, but yeah, that's how I feel right now. What were your thoughts on it?
I agreed with you. I just think it's a massive overpay for a coach who, granted, has done a lot of good, but he's like 9-8 in the playoffs, and he hasn't had more than one win since 2009 in the playoffs. And that was with some really good Saints teams, including a very, very, very good quarterback who fit his system perfectly in Drew Brees. And Russell Wilson, like we saw how Drew Brees looked at the end of his career in this offense. I don't think Russell Wilson is all that much better than he was at the end than Drew Brees was at the end of his career.
Oof.
Like it was bad, Frank. It was really, really bad. And they have a lot to do this offseason, the Broncos. And it's just so weird to me. They've ever since Peyton Manning's retired after 2015, they have been acting like they're just one piece away with just some of the moves they've been making. And they just keep trying things. They just keep throwing stuff at the wall. And like, granted, that's good, I guess. But, at first it was, Teddy Bridgewater is the guy, Drew Lock is the guy. And they just kept doing things that just didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me.
Paxton Lynch was the first. Wasn't that the first domino?
Paxton Lynch was. And I don't know, man. Like, he's Sean Payton is a good coach. Definitely a good coach. Not going to take that away from him. I think this is an upgrade for obviously what they had last year. I do think Sean Payton will have this team playing better overall. Big questions are coming from the defensive coordinator spot. I've seen, he's interested in bringing Fangio in as his defensive coordinator, but they already have a really good one there. So we're kind of waiting to see what happens. But I mean, fuck, man, you're going into the division that has Patrick Mahomes, who's just about to go to his, second Super Bowl already? Third Super Bowl? Third Super Bowl.
Yeah, he's won one.
Super Bowl. And you have Justin Herbert, and obviously the change there, we can save that for a little bit later, but, the Chargers made a good coaching decision as well. The Raiders, who knows what they're going to be looking like next year. This is a very difficult division for him to be traded into, which I don't know, Frank. Sean Payton is a very good coach, yes. I'm just not sure how much this pushes the needle for them. I wouldn't say that this just automatically puts them over the top of this division, or even in the
Jim.
AFC.
It's going to be a close one. I don't know, Jim.
That's Jackie, something we're going to talk about a little bit later. We'll talk about that.
Jackie, let me ask you this just generally. Is there any head coach that's worth a first and a second to you? I feel like that's tough, right? Because for me, the only way that you would be worth that is if you're also a talent evaluator and you're drafting as well. And the only one that comes to mind that I would consider, and I would still maybe even say no, would be Bill B, but his talent evaluation isn't always the greatest. He makes pretty bad draft choices. He's just a phenomenal coach and sort of makes up for it. But I think that sort of caught up to him, all these years later finally. But I'm thinking what head coach would be worth that? And then you're going to have to pay him on top of that. He's probably going to be the highest paid head coach in the league.
I think there are two that I would answer for. I would say number one is Bill, but he has to accept that I'm going to pair him with a GM who knows what they're doing. Because you could argue that his drafting these last few years, not even few,
it's been bad.
Just in general, he coaches up these guys that he likes to the point where they can still make the playoffs on a consistent basis and be, in the running. But you could argue that they probably could have won even more Super Bowls if he had just let someone else take the reins. But so if he would compromise on that, absolutely Bill Belichick. The only other coach I would consider that for is Andy Reid. And that is just because he's just his.
Yeah, that's fair.
And granted, it's tough though with Andy Reid. We give him a ton of credit now, and we should because he's great at what he does. But until Pat Mahomes came along, man, that team wasn't anything super special. Even with Donovan McNabb, he was making the playoffs, but Donovan McNabb was much more like a Dak Prescott type of quarterback. Yep. You could definitely win games with him. So until you have the greatest quarterback of all time, who I'm pretty sure is Patrick Mahomes at this point, I think it's tough to say I would absolutely trade a first-round pick for a head coach. I don't know.
Yeah, I get it. I get it to a degree, but I don't know. Andy Reid, dude. He had Alex Smith balling with Tyreek Hill. He had checked down Alex. But it's if the name of the game is just winning. He had a ton of success. I feel like Sean Payton's level of success is much lower than Andy Reid. Andy Reid, what did they make in Philly? 3 straight NFC Championship games, and a Super Bowl that they lost. I know they wound up losing in the end, but that's still a ton of success.
Yeah. I think right now I would probably say that it's probably either Bill or Andy Reid, but I'm not. They better just hope that this works, because they're about to.
Tomlin? Would you do Tomlin?
No, I wouldn't do Mike Tomlin.
Would you do 2 seconds?
I love Mike Tomlin, but I'm not trading a first-round pick for a guy who just basically finishes 9-8 every single year. Granted, he's a great coach. He's a great coach, but he's only won the one Super Bowl. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
that coach has to just come in and take over this franchise. And I'm going to be honest with you. I think DeMeco Ryans would have been a much better hire, which I kind of do want to talk about that because I think it does really reflect a little bit on what we're talking about. The Broncos almost had to do this because no one else wanted to sign with with them. DeMeco Ryan said fuck no twice, I believe it was, because he's now the head coach of the Texans. And Jim Harbaugh was like, they were also rumored to be in on him, and he ended up obviously staying in Michigan. I just think it speaks to, and that Jonathan Gannon, the defensive coordinator of the Eagles, was basically like, no, I'm good. I'm going to stay in Philly and be the defensive coordinator here. Like, that Eagles job, or the Broncos job, just, it's not attractive. It's really not.
That makes me wonder then what sold Sean Payton on this job. I mean, because he was going to get
this to be the highest coach in the NFL.
Yeah, and like the other guys wouldn't. Like rookie head coaches don't, so that's fair.
And he loves Russ. He's talked about it many, many times. He loves Russ.
Yeah, fair play to him.
A lot of people think that he's the only person that can fix Russell Wilson.
But when has that's going to be the interesting thing. When has Russ ever succeeded when he's thrown the ball 30 plus times? Like I would love to look at what his stats are, whether it's win-loss or something where he like throws the ball over 30 times in a game. Like I feel like the times he had success, the most amount of success in Seattle, it was run heavy, play action, really good defense. And that's not like to down him, because you still have to make the throws when they come, but that's just the type of player I don't want him throwing the ball consistently 30, 35 times.
But maybe that's what Sean Payton will do.
But that's the flip side, Jack. When the fuck has Sean Payton ever done that?
Yeah.
He had Noodle Arm Breeze tossing it 45 times a game.
That's a good point. That's true.
With Alvin Kamara in the backfield. Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray. That was a fucking great 1-2 punch, and he didn't run the ball that much.
And Mark Ingram. He never used
Mark Ingram.
And Reggie Bush, too, when Reggie Bush was in New Orleans. And their best receiver was Marquise Colston.
That's what I mean. So I feel like it's an odd pairing. We'll see, but
I think I think on the flip side of it, I mean, fuck yeah, great job by the New Orleans Saints to get something for a head coach, get a first round pick. That's boom. They are obviously operating like he was never coming back to the Saints, which totally understandable, kind of given their situation. They're sort of in this weird crossfire of, do we rebuild? What do we want to do here? So, I mean, you got basically free picks. I know they're trading back a third, but at the end of the day, I'd rather have a first and a second than a third round pick, obviously.
Yeah, I totally agree. We get into the Texans.
Yeah, we'll get to the Texans. They, as I mentioned, hired DeMeco Ryans, who was with San Francisco, I believe, for like 6 years. He obviously played for the Texans as well. Frank, it's kind of weird that I feel like teams are starting to do this a little bit more now, where it's like former, or like, they were players and then they have that history of the organization. Like, for example, we're obviously not going to get super into this, but Frank Reich getting hired by the Carolina Panthers as their head coach. He was their first quarterback, I believe it was. So it's just kind of interesting that sort of these connections are kind of bubbling up a little bit more. What do you think of the DeMeco Ryans hire? You like it? You don't like it?
I don't like it, and it's not for him. I thought he was the best head coaching candidate out there. I also feel like we're like next year we're gonna have to do like a head coaching carousel a little bit earlier. Coaches get hired earlier and earlier every single year.
Yeah.
Like way before the Super Bowl, which is strange. But I like, had we ranked them like we had in years past, he was my number one. I really, really liked him as a candidate because I think he's a culture guy. I think that's what, the difference between when you're looking for an offensive guy and a defensive guy is the offensive guy is usually looking for the guru who's going to call the plays, who's going to instill this overall system with the offense, and then, look for the DC versus like the DC is what we saw with Matt Eberflus. He's going to come in, be the head coach. He's going to be the CEO. He's going to get this staff. He's going to build this culture and go from there. And whether it's offense or not, or defense, or even if you hire a special teams guy, I think that's the proper way to be a head coach in the NFL. And that's just like everything that we've heard from DeMeco Ryans. That's how he operated. Granted, he was more in the X's and O's as a DC, but that's the way he was presenting himself to be a head coach. So I think that's I mean, that's what Bill has done. That's what Tomlin does. That's what, like, I know Reed calls the plays, but he's instilled a culture everywhere he goes. Like, that's what you need to do. And we've seen that sort of flash in the pan, Mark Trestman and all the offensive guys who were Matt Nagy. I'm using Bears examples, but there's more than that, that sort of can scare you away. So I loved him as the candidate. I just don't trust Houston, dude. They just went one and done 2 years in a row. Especially because, why am I blanking on the coach before Lovey?
David
Culley. David Culley. We thought he did a phenomenal job. They won. What did they win? 4 games that year on a team that, like, so many experts thought were literally going to win 0 games. They had 0 talent on that team, and they were starting a rookie Davis Mills. And he was out coaching people, barely losing games. Like, he looked so good. They fire him. Okay, fine. Maybe you want to go get your guy, but then you hire Lovie Smith, a third-time head coach who also was a failure. Maybe that's harsh, but he didn't do well with the Illini. He did not do good with the Buccaneers. He had vast success with the Bears, so there was that, but that was so long ago. And it's like, what exactly is your plan here? Are you ever going to actually give a regime and a head coach a real shot at this thing to let them build? Like, I don't have faith that that's the case. I don't know if they just think they're closer than what they are, like the ownership group or what. But DeMeco Ryans should get, like, and this may sound nuts. I know people who watch the NFL are going to be like, most people get 3. He needs to get 5 or 6 years.
Well, I don't think contract is 6 years. They gave him a 6-year contract.
Yeah,
which
that's like monopoly money. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But
I get what you're saying.
They're going to be paying 3 coaches this season.
Right. But what I'm saying, though, Jack, is that even on a 5-year, like 4 or 5 year deal, usually by like year 3, you're like, okay, we didn't have success. I don't care if he hasn't had success yet. You have to give someone, like, this thing is gutted. Who do they have? Like, we've talked about as Bears fans, who are going to be starters next year? And we can maybe name like 10, 12, right? The Texans may have less than that. So it's like, you have to give someone a real shot to build this thing from the ground up, and 3 years may not be enough time.
Yeah. And, it's tough because I like DeMeco Ryans. Like you said, I think he would be my number 1 coaching candidate by far. Like, I really don't think there's a ton of people that are like super close to him. I think like maybe Dan Quinn was a guy that was kind of interesting. If you really want to go the offensive coordinator route, Ben Johnson, who's the Lions offensive coordinator, or if you really want to stretch it out, go with, Mike Kafka, who's the Giants offensive coordinator, something like that, or even the Eagles offensive coordinator. Like, that's a route you could go, but I wouldn't put them before DeMeco Ryans. Problem with DeMeco Ryans is, yeah, he can absolutely coach up a defense. What is he going to do on offense? Because the Texans, like you were saying, they have 2 skill players. They have Dameon Pierce, a running back, who's missed the last like 4 games because he was hurt, which not off to a great start. And then Brandon Cooks, who's going to be like 31 and wants to be traded more than anything in the world. So they have nothing. They have nothing to work with on offense. So they really, it's going to be very curious to see how he builds that team, because like you were saying, he can coach a defense, absolutely. But he has to build the defense.
Yeah.
And not only does he have to build the defense, he has to build the offense too. He has to build both sides of the ball. Is he going to be able to do that? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a huge question.
And that's my whole point, is like, you can't call this thing a failure if he has a losing record going into his 3rd year or after his 3rd year. Like, unless it's absolutely Hugh Jackson bad, which I don't forecast it to be. I think I think DeMeco Ryans going to be a really good culture setter. You've got to give this dude way more than the average lifespan of a new coach, even if he's failing, because you have given 2 straight regimes 1 year. Well, 2 straight coaches. I think it's the same GM. That's crazy. He gets to hire his 3rd coach,
Nick Caserio. He just I don't understand the plan from the Houston Texans side of things. Why are they just letting him run through head coaches left and right? I don't get it.
It has to be a joke of an ownership. I mean, they had that pastor as their like lead consultant for how many years? I mean, we talk about the way that the Bears are run and how upset we've been and like how excited we are. And that there's a CEO that's a football guy. Like, I don't know the inner workings of the Texans, but there's no shot that it's any better than that. Then that's saying a lot because the Bears have been behind the times for quite some time now. But that's my point. The same way that people talk about, like, if you draft a quarterback high and he's a bust, how far that puts your team back. You just had 2 straight head coaches that didn't get to build anything. That also sets your team back. Like, you're not giving regimes a shot to actually build anything, to even hand anything off to the next guy. If they weren't the right hire. So,
right.
Yeah, I love him as the candidate. I do not like him going to the Texans. And I hope he got a record-setting deal for a rookie head coach because goddamn.
Yeah, well, I mean, 6 years is that says a lot already because that's a commitment. So hopefully the Texans actually stick with this.
Am I crazy? Did they not give Lovey 5?
I think it was 3. I thought it was 3. Maybe I'm wrong.
You could.
I don't know.
Maybe Culley was the 2 and then the Lovey was the 3, and that's where I got 5 from. I could be combining.
I don't know, but like I said, the Panthers did hire Frank Reich. I think that's a respectable hire for them. Obviously we saw the impact Frank Reich had on the Colts after they fired him for Jeff Saturday. Like, he wasn't the problem in Indianapolis, and I hope that was obviously very clear. Then the Cardinals obviously are still looking for their new head coach. Options are slim. Options are very, very slim at this point in terms of who they like. I've heard them connected a lot to Brian Flores, which I think would be a really good opportunity to kind of get someone in there who I think would really basically tell Kyler, come on, sink or swim, because we need to figure this out. And then obviously the Colts are just basically interviewing. I've actually got a second round interview with the Colts based off of how many people they're fucking and talking with. Eric Bieniemy, Rick Bisaccia, Brian Callahan, Mike Kafka, Wink Martindale, Raheem Moore, just everybody they can fucking think of, including Jeff Saturday, which goddamn, that would be just icing on the cake if they hire him. But the only other hiring right now that I thought was really interesting, we sort of touched on it a little bit earlier, is the Cowboys, Frank, they have mutually parted ways with Kellen Moore. Mike McCarthy is going to be calling plays. So to me, that says exactly what happened with Matt Nagy right before he got fired. This is basically the last chance he'll have to prove that he can be the head coach. And then, Kellen Moore decided to sign with the Los Angeles Chargers and basically run their offense. Talk about falling upwards. You upgrade your quarterback, you upgrade your skill positions almost everywhere outside of receiver. Like, this is just a great opportunity for Kellen Moore. Do you like this fit for Justin Herbert and for Kellen Moore as well?
I do. And the thing that I really like about it, and this actually applies to the Frank Reich hire as well, is I think you're going to sort of see where things start and where things end in regards to, Kellen Moore's limitations versus Dak Prescott's limitations. Potentially even like what Zeke brought to the table towards the end of that tenure there, as Kellen Moore is the OC. But the same with Frank Reich. Like, it became a shit show in Indy after Andrew Luck retired. And it's like, I know a lot of people blamed him for whatever reason or were really upset that he couldn't, bring out MVP Carson Wentz when, like, in reality, I don't think Wentz was ever that guy. He caught a hot streak that year and it just was what it was. And then potentially, the injury when I think he tore his ACL that year as well, like that, not everyone always recovers from those. But yeah, I really, at this point in the offseason, to me, that's the best hire so far is the Chargers hiring him as Kellen Moore as their OC.
Yeah, I just think it gives him a lot more options with Justin Herbert, and I think it's going to give Justin Herbert it's going to make better use of Justin Herbert just overall. Like, Kellen Moore likes to take deep shots. He likes to use more of the middle of the field as opposed to just being check downs left and right. So, if you have Austin Eckler, you might want to think about maybe trading him in the offseason, just some dynasty fantasy football advice. But I love this fit. I think it's a great opportunity for Kellen Moore to show, because, Frank, remember last year, right in the beginning of the coaching search when Matt Nagy was hired, Kellen Moore was at the top of our list in terms of just overall who we thought could be a really, really good fit offensive coordinator wise. And then, the last couple of years happened and we're like, we'll see. We'll see. So, like I said, I think this is a really good bounce back opportunity for him. It's probably the best situation he could have hoped to land in. Other than that, I don't think there's a ton more news. I'm going to be honest with you, Frank. I don't miss this. I don't miss being in the coaching carousel. I don't miss wondering who's going to, what's going to happen. This is by far the most excited I've been to just get the Super Bowl done, over and done with. Like, I'm ready to go. I'm ready for the offseason to really start.
I agree. And can I tell you something, man? Every time I hear Frank Reich's name, the more like content that I consume, like right now we're at the tail end of Man in the High Castle. Have you ever watched that show?
I have.
Very good. And the connotation behind Reich is just not good. If I was Frank Reich, I would change my last name. There's just no shot I would keep that.
I think I saw something where he is actually Frank Reich the third.
So he's the third Reich.
I think I saw that.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
There's no way.
So, yeah.
Is he, he has to have German blood. No, like that word doesn't derive from anything else, I don't think.
He's pure American. All right. He's pure American. He loves America. He loves football. It is what
now I'm on his Wikipedia right now. Frank Reich, who is of German descent.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not exactly shocking. But Frank, there is some Bears stuff we did want to talk about while you're looking at looking that up. We got something? What do we got?
No, I'm just laughing.
Okay. All right. We do got some Bears stuff we wanted to talk about because for some reason, Bears fans can't just move on from anything. We always have to live in the past. We always have to talk about the what if. We had all decided to move on this offseason, right? We got Justin Fields. We have the first overall pick. We have $100 million basically in cap space. We're going to have the best offseason. This is going to be great. The NFC, Frank, is fucking wide open. Let's be real, because we're going to talk about that when we get to the games from this past weekend. This NFC is wide open. The Bears have arguably a top 10 quarterback, and that's something we're going to discuss in the offseason about exactly where we're going to rank Justin Fields and just kind of moving some people around depending on where they land, who retires, who doesn't retire, all that good stuff. But we had all this excitement. We were ready to go. And then fucking Patrick Mahomes wins another goddamn AFC championship game. Congratulations to the Chiefs. And Patrick Mahomes' father decides to go on Chicago sports radio and tell everybody that Patrick Mahomes was indeed told by Ryan Pace and the Bears that he was going to be drafted at number 3 overall and be the Bears quarterback. Come on. Like, why you got to do that, Patrick Mahomes Sr.? Why you got to be telling us that conversation was in fact had? Because the whole thing, Frank, for the longest time that I had been able to let it go, it was never the conversation of Mitch or Patrick Mahomes. He was never even in the conversation. It was supposed to be, why didn't the Bears draft Deshaun Watson? That was the whole thing. And now we find out that fucking Ryan Pace had the correct decision in mind, but then decided, nah, I like that kid who drives the Camry. Let's fucking trade up to fucking get him. Frank, what were your first thoughts when you saw Patrick Mahomes Sr. basically saying that the Bears were told him they were going to draft him?
I had a lot of fucking thoughts, dude. I had a lot of thoughts. The first thought was, I told you, actually, I texted you my first thought, and this is, I've convinced myself since that this is exactly what happened. They handed Roger Goodell that card, and it said Patrick Mahomes. But he messed up. He said Mitch Trubisky. He stuttered. He fucked up. And the McCaskies were too scared to correct him. So like, all right, whatever, we'll just take him, and then the story just goes on. But no, in all seriousness, what I wanted to know then was like, what happened? First of all, when did the conversation happen? Because if it happened very early in the draft process, I get you continue to scout and you just changed your mind. But let's just, in this scenario, let's say it was very close to draft day. What in the world happened? And what it made me think of is just how out of sync that whole regime was. Because if you remember, reports came out, and I want to say John Fox confirmed this. He wanted Deshaun Watson.
Yes.
He didn't even think it was close. If it was up to him, he would have drafted Deshaun.
Yes.
Minor rumors came about Patrick Mahomes, but Mitch was a game day or a draft day surprise to some people, but then the rumors came out about a secret meeting and the Camry story. So there was connections there. So I just wondered, whose real decision was that? And what exactly happened? But then it just reminded me of how out of sorts that whole regime was. Because we've gone over this a million times, but they hired Pace. They didn't really give him his coaching hire. He did not want John Fox, but they wanted him to have a veteran presence as a head coach to be there to help him along. His real hire was Nagy, but in the beginning he wanted Dan Quinn instead of. There were just so many things going on. So was the Mitch thing, was that a McCaskey choice? Because it wasn't a John Fox choice.
Yeah.
And if the GM literally told your father or you and your family you were going to be drafted here, what the fuck happened?
So, a couple things, right? The way that he was saying it sounded like this was more like draft is coming up next week. Here's the pick. We're going to make the pick. What I think happened with the only logical explanation, and this is based off of things that we saw in the draft, the way that Ryan Pace talked about the quarterbacks, what I think happened was, because if you'll remember, right before the draft, I think it was either a day or the day of, the reports started coming out that the Browns were going to take Mitch Trubisky. It was almost 50-50, hey, I think this could happen. Because I remember exactly where I was. I was sitting in class at Northeastern Illinois University. Shout out Golden Eagles. And I was sitting in our film class. It was 6 p.m. It was the night of the draft. I was sitting there, and I had the computer on, notes, but I'm really watching the draft, no problem. And I'm just literally saying, please take Mitch, please take Mitch, please take Mitch, because I did not want the Bears to draft him specifically, because that was they were linked to him for a very long time. So what I think happened was Ryan Pace saw Mitch Trubisky as quarterback one. I think that was all along and maybe not all along, but definitely by the time the draft was rolling around, obviously he was quarterback one. Mahomes was quarterback two. And so I think what happened was he started hearing these rumors that the Browns were going to take Mitch Trubisky. Maybe he heard it from a source that he trusted, and he was like, all right, Mitch is going to be off the board. We're going to take Patrick Mahomes at number 3. That's what we're going to do. And when the Browns ended up drafting Myles Garrett, I think that must be why Ryan Pace traded up to San Francisco, because he was like, holy shit, Mitch is still available. We have to trade up to go get him. That's the only logical explanation based off of what we had heard pre-draft, what Ryan Pace ended up doing to trade up to get to San Francisco to get that pick, and the way that he talked about Mitch all the way through. The only thing that's a little strange is people were bringing up the fact that Patrick Mahomes was talking about teams, who was interested in you. And he has never mentioned the Chicago Bears. So I don't know what the true story is.
Yeah.
But I thought that was interesting. What do you think? Do you think that's maybe why they traded up? Does it make sense? Am I conspiracy theorying?
No, your story, your story makes a ton of sense. I think there's a lot of logic rooted in there. We'll never know what the true story is, I don't think, or maybe down the road when people write books and whatever. But one thing is for certain, Jack, there had to be something there, because do you remember that year? Was it 2019 when or 2020 when Patrick Mahomes lit us the fuck up? He threw for 4 touchdowns, and he did the count. He did the 4 touchdowns, and he did the draft. What was it, 9 or whatever? It felt that was one of my thoughts too. Was I remember that, and I was like, that felt a little more personal than oh, I'm just beating
I just
a
had
team.
I just had like like one of those like core memory moments. I remember sitting on the podcast talking about it where it was like, because people were mad at him in Chicago for doing that, and you and I were talking about it, and we were both like, we would have loved it for them to have drafted him, but it was never even in the conversation apparently.
Yeah.
So, which makes it even funnier now that if that is the case. One thing I do have to mention, Frank, we can't just sit here and pretend like Patrick Mahomes would be Patrick Mahomes in Chicago, right? Like, granted, he's a transcendent player. He probably makes anything work. But it is so hard for me to believe that he doesn't end up just being Jay Cutler in Chicago. Jay Cutler 2.0. Because who's coaching him?
I mean,
who's fucking what's his goddamn
Adam Gase was the OC at the time, right?
Gase, you think Adam Gase could coach up a very raw Patrick Mahomes into being what he is now? No. If we had Andy Reid or Bruce Arians, if we had made the correct decision in hiring, and they were one of our coaches, then yeah, okay, sure, Patrick Mahomes would be Patrick Mahomes. But like, people got to stop acting like Patrick Mahomes was just like right out of the jump the greatest player of all time. Like, he had sat for a full year. He wouldn't be sitting here for a full year, Frank. He wouldn't be sitting here because Mike Glennon was that starter. Mike Glennon is not Alex Smith. All right, let's be real about that.
Yeah, no, I mean it's fair. You would always wonder, what Pat would be here. The one thing is for certain though, just from a talent standpoint, just like you said, I think he transcends scheme and even like surroundings. I mean, we're gonna get into the games here in a minute, but fuck, dude. I mean, look what he was working with, and it wasn't like the game plan to have that wide receiving core out there by the end. Those players got hurt.
Yeah.
And granted, you still have the greatest tight end of all time. You still have one of the best offensive minds of all time. I get that, but god damn.
Well, and that's the thing too. You got to remember the offensive talent that the Bears would not have, and that's not having Tyreek Hill and not having Travis Kelce, which I'm not saying have made Patrick Mahomes' career, but they've definitely helped. Having the greatest tight end of all time has obviously helped Patrick Mahomes' career. Can we agree on that?
As if Cam Meredith wasn't on the Chicago Bears.
Man, I feel bad for him. He went to the Saints, and that was it.
That was coming off the MCL that he clearly never recovered from.
Yeah.
That was a huge God. How bad if we had it in Chicago? That was such a huge debate. That was back. I used to go on Chicago Bears forums and mostly browse, but I'd comment every now and then, and people were going at each other's throats about no, we got to re-sign Cam Meredith, and other people were like, no, he really wasn't that good beforehand, and I was coming and you're no, you're a fucking idiot. He's the greatest.
He was definitely our best receiver.
But that's not saying much. I'm fourth on the depth chart right now.
He'd probably be wide receiver too right now.
Holy fuck.
No, there's like Frank said, we do want to talk about the games that happen, and we'll kind of mold that. We're gonna mold that into a Bears conversation because I think there is a way to do that. There is one last thing that I wanted to mention, Frank, before we get to the games, and this will be relatively quick. Aaron Rodgers did this last year. Same shit. He's doing it again this offseason. Well, it's been fucking 3 weeks since my season ended, but I haven't really thought about it too much. I don't really care what happens. But the Packers shouldn't be talking about trading me, okay? I haven't even had those conversations with them yet. It's like, dude, shut the fuck up. Shut your fucking mouth. Make a decision. If you want to play, play. If you don't. The organization they've done fucking everything they can, almost, to fucking bend over backwards for you. They have to get a plan. You see how fast coaches are getting hired? Luke Getsy right now is coaching at the fucking Senior Bowl. It's happening. The draft process has started. The Packers don't have time to wait for you anymore. And what are you bringing to the table? Nothing. 2 first-round exits.
Yeah.
Dude,
and
get over yourself.
You know what? Last year I really wasn't all that annoyed with it. You're a free agent, totally get it. You just signed it. What was it? A 4-year deal?
2-year.
Was it 2? I mean, regardless, you're under contract. My point is, like, you're under contract now. So, like, can we not drag this out? The other thing that's really telling to me, and I usually don't look too much into a lot of this stuff. I do this a lot with, especially when LeBron was on the Heat and they were going through the tougher times. Towards the end, the amount of times he like said "I" instead of "we" in press conferences and things. And that's not the "I" and "we" thing isn't always a big deal. But the one thing that really stuck out to me with Aaron Rodgers is that he never talks about Super Bowls. He talks about MVPs. I still have another MVP, right? I can win MVP again. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But like, I don't think Brady gives a fuck about anything like that. And I bring up Brady because these are the 2 older quarterbacks in the league. And like, you're talking about like guys who for a while, in the same manner that Peyton Manning was compared to Tom Brady, then it became like Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady. And then like the only thing you can concede is like, sure, maybe Aaron Rodgers is more talented, but greater. No, he's not. And it's like, that feels a little telling to me about your mindset. Because even this year, oh, well, we can still come back. I'm the reigning 2-time MVP. Like, well, I don't know. That's such a strange mindset to have. Versus like when you hear, like, Tom Brady didn't talk too much, even on the podcast, which is kind of bad with him and Jim Lampley. And I think Fitzgerald is on there too. But you hear like his teammates talk about him and he's like texting them at 7 a.m. Better still be asleep. You need your 8 hours. Like, get up. And when you get in here, you're going to work. Like, he doesn't give a fuck. And like, even like Gronk, when he's talking about like regular season awards, and he's like, you think I'm fucking here to win MVP? I don't get, because I think that didn't Gronk or someone said something like, man, we were pissed that Brady didn't win the MVP that year. And he literally didn't give a shit. He literally told them, I don't give a fuck. I'm here for rings. I don't care about the regular season awards. Yeah. I'm here to win another ring. And that was his first year in Tampa. Like, that to me is such, and some of it like is a lore and maybe people are embellishing, but you're not just making stories like that up.
Yeah. And for Rodgers specifically, like, I understand wanting to take a mental break from it. I do. I understand, especially when you're 39, 40 years old and, you know, you just finished playing your season, but like, you can't be like, well, the Packers are, you know, I don't think they're having conversations without me. That's interesting. While you're golfing, they're working. They're not taking breaks. Like you just lost in the first round of the playoffs, like again for the second year in a row. Like what can you possibly, or you didn't even make the playoffs, I should say. Like, what can you expect? Why, you know, what can you realistically expect from them? Like, you didn't make the playoffs. Like, you'd think if he really wanted to end his career in Green Bay and really wanted another chance to ring, that he wouldn't be taking time off. He'd be talking with the Packers about his decision. Like, he'd be coming up with a plan. Like, but he acts like the Packers revolve around him, and it's just like, I can't believe they gave him that deal instead of just moving on last year. I don't understand. What did they get out of that? What did they get for $50 million? Nothing. They got nothing. They didn't make the playoffs.
Yeah, they didn't even disappoint in the NFC Championship this go round.
Like, it's crazy to me. It's genuinely crazy to me, and I just wanted to mention it. But enough about him and that piece of shit organization. Let's talk about some really good teams and some weird, just absolutely weird games that took place. Let's start with the NFC Championship game. San Francisco went into Philadelphia, and Philadelphia they took care of business. Obviously,
we said it had a chance to be a blowout.
Yeah, I don't think we thought it would happen like that, obviously. But obviously, you know, the big story being Brock Purdy. And can we talk about Brock Purdy for a second, Frank? Because I saw a lot of people saying that the Eagles had the easiest path to the Super Bowl of teams they've ever seen. And of course, you know, in this era of commentating, you know, people are going to embellish things and go down. Oh, it's the easiest. They're bums. They're frauds. They're love frauds. They're Mickey Mouse rings. They're this and that. Am I crazy, or did the Eagles hurt Brock Purdy and knocked him out of the game?
And Josh Johnson.
Who Come on, man. How is he still in the league? He's terrible.
He's got to be a good locker room guy.
I've seen him play 100 times, and he's just not good. I don't get it. I don't understand. But yeah, Brock Purdy obviously gets hurt, tears the ACL or the UCL, I should say. He's going to need Tommy John, which is a pitching injury. But man, the Eagles knocked him out. And who is the guy that we talked about on this podcast being a problem? Hassan Reddick. That dude, man possessed out there.
I mean, listen, we talked about the pass rush as a whole, and that was why I picked them to potentially blow them out, because it's not like Brock Purdy inspired any confidence in the win over the Cowboys. Again, like the Cowboys lost that game more than the Niners won that game, right? Like that defense balled out. And it's nothing against Brock Purdy. He's fucking Mr. Irrelevant. Like the fact that he's even done what he's done is super impressive at all. He can retire, and he's probably the best Mr. Irrelevant of all time.
Not probably. He definitely is. Yeah,
and that's what I mean. So, but again, you were going up against a big boy defense. That's the best pass rush in the league. And to be quite honest with you, I think that's the most well-rounded team in the league on offense and on defense. I mean, Jalen Hurts just won another game, tossing for 124 yards. Like, they don't have to do much sometimes. It just is what it is. That's the way that they're built. Yeah, so, I mean, people – so without the dog in the race, I hated that Purdy got hurt because I wanted it to be a good game, even though we predicted it could be a blowout. But the reason we predicted it to be a blowout was because Philly just feels superior.
Yeah.
Like they have just as good of a defense as San Fran and a much better quarterback on the opposite end with, dare I say, better weapons outside of the running back position. I'm taking Philly's receiving core and tight end. Well, maybe not. I like George Kittle. He's been playing very well. But I'm taking the receiving core over what they got going in San Fran. Combine that with Jalen Hurts being probably a top 5 quarterback right now and Brock Purdy not being that. I mean, to me, that was just the recipe for what it was. So, like, I know people. I think if you wanted to watch a good game, Brock Purdy being out, having a complaint there, yeah, that sucked. I took a nap halfway through because I just knew it was over. And then I woke up and it was 31-7. I was like, great, this is exactly what I thought what would happen, especially after he got knocked out. But if you're like a Niners fan or someone who bet against Philly and like, oh, that was the reason, I don't know if there's a different outcome if Brock Purdy was in there. What did he get knocked out in the second or third drive? Yeah. Philly was putting constant pressure on this guy. He was going to get pressured all night.
The one thing I will say I was a little surprised by was the Eagles' lack of aggression after, when that injury happened, because the 49ers were hanging around up until they started making some really dumb mistakes. Josh Johnson just dropping the football. I've never seen that in the playoffs, I think, which is just like unbelievable that happened. But then, the Eagles just, I didn't like some of the play calling they were doing. I just didn't make Kenneth Gainwell, by the way, like he might be their starting running back next year. He looked really, really good the last couple of weeks. And obviously Miles Sanders is up to be a free agent. But yeah, Frank, like the Eagles, that's why we both picked them. Brock Purdy had never faced a defense like that. And, I hated to see him get hurt. Like that sucks. And then Josh Johnson getting hurt too. Brock Purdy having to come back in and literally not being able to throw. They did not have a quarterback who could throw the football. And you could tell, like, seeing George Kittle after that game, a guy who's usually just, like, super happy, like, really fun, just be that dejected because, like, they couldn't do anything. They couldn't do anything other than run the football. And that's why you see guys like Trent Williams starting fights at the end of the game, because it's just like frustration. It's like, what can you do? You can't do anything. You can't beat this team if you can't throw the football when you're down 3 scores. Like it was hard to watch, to be honest with you. And it was disappointing because the much, much better broadcast was on that game versus the counterpart, the juxtaposition that happened in the AFC title game. And that's really all I got to say about the NFC title game. Before I move on, did you want to talk about anything else in that game?
There was one really funny moment when Christian McCaffrey thought he was going to have to go in at quarterback, and he looked at that fucking play sheet, and he was like, thank God I'm a running back, because there's no shot. And granted, he had, gotten there midway through the year, so he probably isn't a master of that offense just yet with all the calls and checks that you have to do as a quarterback. So that was that should be made into a meme, the face that he made when he was looking at that play sheet.
that run they had, the run that he had, phenomenal. Like that was a great trade for them. Like, I know that they obviously didn't make it to the Super Bowl and aren't going to win a Super Bowl from that trade, but you think if those quarterbacks had stayed healthy, they'd have a legitimate chance.
He's a fucking machine, dude.
That was a very good trade for them, and the 49ers should be in good shape next year too. We'll see what they obviously do at quarterback. I think I saw today that Tom Brady is like plus like 120 to be the 49ers starting quarterback, and that's like the lowest of his odds. So something to keep an eye on as we go into the offseason. Frank, let's talk about the AFC champ or the the AFC championship. I was right the first time. The Bengals losing to the Kansas City Chiefs 23-20. What a just strange game that ended up being. Remind me, did we both take the Bengals? Did you take the Bengals as well?
I took the Bengals, yeah.
Okay.
Did you stick with the Bengals? I thought
I did. Stick with the Bengals. I thought that was easy money. I had $20 on the Eagles to win and the Bengals to win. So I was a little bit more upset than I usually am in a game that the Bears aren't playing. Just because I was more frustrated than anything that, like, the Bengals, I know people were talking about the refs left and right, and I do want to talk about that a little bit. The Bengals just didn't play well.
Yep.
They kind of shot themselves in the foot left and right, making just dumb mistakes. Joe Burrow had a couple interceptions that just weren't good. They just weren't good. They weren't good enough to win that game. They didn't look like the better team at any point in the game. I don't know what was going on with Joe Mixon, but he must have caught Cole Kmet disease because he looked slow as fuck.
He did.
I don't know what was going on there, but I mean, Patrick Mahomes, that throw that he made, the touchdown throw that he just fired in there to Marquez Valdes-Scantling, like, that throw was incredible.
He's insane, dude. But to talk about the Bengals really quick, you're right. The game plan itself was very weird. I would have liked to see them run the ball a little bit more, and if Mixon wasn't 100%, you feed P. Ryan a little bit. But I mean, at what point do you give that offensive line help? Frank Clark was all over the field. He was. I don't know. I'm gonna be honest, Jack. I have a bad memory, so someone may be like, "You're a fucking idiot." 2 years ago, so I just don't remember a defensive lineman having that big of an impact in a championship game. Seriously, he took over. I mean, Donald played really well in the Super Bowl last year, but it didn't look like that, dude. Frank Clark was a fucking man possessed. We talk about Hassan Reddick. Frank Clark had like 3 times the game that Hassan Reddick did. He was, and it's well, not Frank Clark, Chris Jones. I'm sorry. I'm saying Frank
Honestly,
Clark.
both work.
Well, Frank Clark was really good, but Chris Jones was, to me, and this is no shade at anyone else on the Chiefs, especially Patrick Mahomes, but he was the best player on the field that day. He was all over the place, just absolutely wrecking that offensive line. It didn't matter where they lined him up, and then even the last play of the game, they lined him up on the opposite side, and the Chiefs the Bengals just weren't ready for it. So just very strange stuff there. But it made me realize, man, like look at that secondary. I can't, and I'm not a Chiefs fan, so people lambast me, but I can't name very many people in that secondary. But look at how much better they're able.
The best one got hurt in the beginning of the game.
Yeah. But look at how well they're able to perform with the pass rush. And that just reminded me of how down we could sometimes get on our young secondary. And I'm like, damn, dude, if we just had a Frank Clark, if we just had a Chris Jones, give me something give me some pressure, and maybe we could see what these guys could do. Like it's very clearly hand in hand, because you talked about the couple throws. One of the picks by Burrow was awful, completely on him. But that second one, that was a phenomenal play by the corner. I don't remember who the corner was, but it was a diving. I mean, it was a really good throw, and he just dove, got his hand on it and tipped it up. I mean, you just tipped your hat at that point. That corner made a great play.
And it was basically a long punt, anyways. Didn't really.
Yeah, that's true as well. But to see what Pat did, hobbled with that high ankle sprain. Juju's not in the game. Kadarius Toney gets hurt. McCole Hardman re-aggravates his groin injury. I mean, he's doing it, but got something Kemp. I don't remember his first name, and that's no disrespect. I just didn't know him going in. and you obviously still have Travis Kelce out there, but I mean, he's just making throw after throw still. And then shout out to Sky Moore for like the 30 or 40-yard punt return at the end of the game to really set them up. I mean, that was just a phenomenal display by that team who, to be quite honest, especially after those injuries, the one of the secondary piece, the ones of the receivers, they shouldn't have been in that game.
That was the thing that was frustrating for me. Obviously, I had money on it, but I would assume for Bengals fans as well, where it was just like they should be better than this. They look what they did to the Buffalo Bills. They kicked their asses, and the Bengals just could not get right. They kept. I mean, think about how many third and longs they had, and it was first and 19 and second and 14 and third and 12. Like they just could never get in sync on offense. They finished the first quarter with no positive yards. I think we really underestimated how bad that offensive line was going to be or could have been because they played so well in Buffalo. Yep. But obviously the Chiefs, defensive line, they weren't missing Von Miller. They had their best pass rusher. So maybe, that should have been taken into account a little bit more. I think the injury to Tyler Boyd hurt them a little bit more than I expected it to. Fuck, man, T. Higgins, though. Like, I know people are like, well, why would they trade him? I would be looking for an extension if I was him. He's playing on second-round money. He wants to get paid. And if they don't want to pay him, they got to pay Burrow. They got to pay Chase. They got to pay all these people. And they still have to upgrade the offensive line again. Bears come calling. Come on.
Well, that's the scenario that I painted, though. That's why I would love to recoup another first-round pick.
Yeah. That jump ball he had, oh, man, to score that touchdown.
Insane. And that's, you know what, like, that's where I sort of distinguish people when we have conversations about Justin Fields, where, you got to know, we got to take more chances and like maybe throw people open. And I think there's a degree to that with him. But then I'm like, well, who do you think does that the best? They all say Joe Burrow. And I'm like, that's fair. He's very good at that. But look at who he's throwing to. And again, I've said this before. There's an element of trust there. I don't know if Joe Burrow's doing that, to the receiving core that we have.
Yeah,
it's not like part of it is skill. He's able to put it into a place where only his receiver can make a play on it, or it just gets broken up and it's an incomplete pass. It's a very hard play to pick off. So there's a lot of skill involved, but again, that trust there that I can put it here and my receiver can make that play. That goes beyond like a limitation of what a quarterback can and can't do.
And there were multiple throws in that game where Joe Burrow was throwing to
that fourth down. That fourth down deep ball to Jamar Chase was the same exact thing.
I mean, throwing in fucking double coverage. I mean, just the balls. And Frank, that was something I did want to bring up as well. I mean, because I know we wanted to kind of continuously loop the Bears into this conversation because I think it's important to, when our podcast is literally titled after the Bears. But it makes me a little worried. I'm not going to lie. It kind of brings up those feelings I had towards the end of the year with Matt Eberflus, where it's like, all right, if they're in this situation next year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever, however long it takes them to get to the, NFC title game, is Matt Eberflus going to have the balls to make some of these decisions, like Nick Sirianni going for it on fourth down after fourth down after fourth down, Joe Burrow throwing it for on 4th and 19 and double? Like, is he going to have those kinds of or is it just going to be, we're down, we picked up a fumble. Josh Johnson just fumbled. We picked it up. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the first down. Let's just kick a field goal. Like, is that what it's going to be? I'm not saying I think it's one way or the other. I'm just like, you see how important those decisions ended up being. I'm curious kind of what happens moving forward.
I am too. And part of me feels like it's not only just in a coach's DNA, but it's the same way we're talking about quarterbacks needing to trust receivers to make these plays. A team sort of has to earn the trust of the coaching staff to be aggressive in those spots.
Yeah.
So granted, this year, like, people sort of trash us for that, where it's like, well, aren't they trying to lose? Like, who cares? And it's like, we're making a bigger point than that. It's not about the individual game, but nuance is lost everywhere on social media. And I understand your worry. And to me, it's like, I hearken to like when Harbaugh is asking Lamar last year, "Hey, are we going for this? You want to go for it?" And he's like, "Fuck yeah, I do. All right, we're taking the punt team back out. Go for it." Like that to me is trusting your personnel. And so I guess the optimistic view is you would almost have to be an idiot to go for it on 4th down with this Bears team. Yeah, unless it's like, I mean, because you think about it, your money play was probably an RPO in which Justin Fields kept and ran for it. On 4th down, if I'm a defensive coordinator, I'm stacking the box with 9.
Make him throw.
Yeah, and it's not that Justin Fields can't throw. We've covered this. It's just because there's no weapons. Who the fuck's he throwing it to on 4th and 6? You know what I mean? Like you're forcing this team in a situation that exploits their limitations.
Yeah.
Now, and that was why I told you I wasn't as worried. I think you were looking into the future a little bit more than I was, and I understood it. And I don't want to start to have worries that aren't here yet. But if we do have a team that has weapons, that Field is showing you he can pass consistently and make these plays and give his receivers a shot, and he doesn't do that, that was our biggest problem with Lovey over the years. He was very conservative. He kept his team in games, but just couldn't win late. We need that to be a thing. We need, to have that Nick Sirianni attitude.
Well, and you look at those Final Four coaches out there, Frank. Kyle Shanahan, offense. Zach Taylor, offense. Nick Sirianni, offense. Andy Reid, offense. These guys are a little more aggressive than the defense who wants to win with their defense. They want to trust their guys a little bit more. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah,
I find that a little interesting. I'm not saying, it's guaranteed. But Frank, fuck man, you look at the final 8 coaches in the divisional round. Only one of those guys is the defensive guy.
That was the Bills, right?
And Sean McDermott. So I'm not saying you can't win with a defensive-minded head coach. I'm not saying that. But I think there is something to the effect that these offensive coaches continue to win playoff games and get into these situations where you're going to the Super Bowl titles. Like,
it's fair.
Bruce Arians, obviously, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and
Sean McVay
last year. I'm just saying that if there's any sort of connecting conspiracy theories that you want to go to, that's going to be something to keep an eye on moving forward. I'll be curious to see how that works.
That's fair, but I will say though, again, all those guys seem to take more of the CEO approach. I know Andy Reid calls the plays, but that culture that he sets there and everything that he does,
which is what Eberflus does. So,
and not for nothing though, that it's hard to even count Sirianni and the Eagles because I think that defense is better, and that's saying a lot because that offense is very good. I think the defense is better than that offense. I'm telling you, I think they're the most well-rounded team in the league. They're insane. They can win in so many different ways.
Sirianni makes me laugh. I'm just like, he's such like a dork. I don't know.
Listen, but he is the perfect coach. He has the perfect amount of petty for Philadelphia. Yeah. I don't know if that works anywhere unless he's winning in New York. New York it will work as well. But I could see him in other markets rubbing the media the wrong way where they start to like taint his image. Where in like Philly, they're eating that shit up.
But it's so funny. You just remember his introductory press conference a couple of years ago, and he's just.
But did you hear that he played that for his team?
That's incredible.
And he showed the message was something like, it's not how you start, like it's how you finish. Like, look at my first, like I was so bad at my first conference. Now let's look at the second one. Let's look at some of the clips of like more recent ones. Like, look, like I mean, to me, I'm not gonna lie to you, man. When you think about like building a culture and building trust in your team. That first press conference was a little bit embarrassing. He got clowned all over social media. So for him to do that, to like unveil that, to not have that ego, that's pretty fucking cool, dude. That's what he's building there is really good.
Yeah, own it. Own when you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like just be real with your guys. Like this, we're kind of entering this era where it's like you kind of have to be real with your guys. Zach Taylor, I think, is another guy like that. Andy Reid, obviously,
McDaniel and Miami.
Yeah. I think that works as well. There is, a couple other things I wanted to talk about, and we can make this a little bit longer as well. That podcasts usually run a little bit long. But that's okay. It's okay. You guys get us for once a week. I think you want to hang out with us a little bit longer. Frank, Tony Romo has got to stop being in on these big games. Like
He's
I never thought I would miss like Joe Buck and Troy Aikman this much. Like they were always just kind of there, right? And they were always, it was a big game. You knew they were calling it. It was just like part of football. That was it. Fuck, man. Romo is so bad, and you get that juxtaposition of the game being right after Greg Olsen, who's just phenomenal.
He's been great.
So fucking good, and I'm glad he's calling the Super Bowl. But you go against that with Tony Romo, who's just like, he starts a sentence, makes noises, and then just at the end just doesn't go back to what he was originally saying. I couldn't follow what he was saying half the time. It's insane how bad things have gotten for him, because just a few years ago he was the guy. Everybody loved Tony Romo.
Everyone except me. I've called it since the start. I fucking hated him. Like everyone liked him because he did he was fairly. How do you even word that? He just recently retired, so he still like understood defensive concepts very well because he was literally in a quarterback room the year before. He knew just off pre-snap reads what could happen and on both sides of the ball, and he would like do the draw up thing and he'd call the play, and that's exactly what happened. And that was great. That was phenomenal. But that's like what a third guy in the booth does. Like I don't need, because everything in between that was the weird like inner dialogue. Hey, and then he's saying, I see you, little guy, and then we're gonna go over here, and then he's saying what we're gonna do. I don't know, Jim. It's gonna be a close one. He did that bullshit on that fucking pass interference call. That was like clear as day. And the one thing I'll give Tony Romo credit for is that the one thing that he does get right every single time is he knows what the flag is gonna be and who it's gonna be on. And like he sees a hold right when it happens. 62 just got called for a hold. That's what the flag is for, and he's right. So for him to do it then, I'm like, what? He's it's close. And then they show the replay. It's like 3 full seconds before the ball is even like. What do you mean it was close? He's Jack. I can't do it with him, bro. He's bad, and especially when you got guys like Greg Olsen. I really like Mark Sanchez. He sort of has a little corniness to him, but he like owns it almost, and he has these like little jokes and things. But like, Romo just does not provide the level of insight at all that you expect from a former quarterback.
He's like devolved into like, someone must have told him like, hey man, you need to be more of like a character. You need to have more of a character on TV. And he's sort of devolved into from the analyst who just breaks things down to just this wackadoo. Oh, you got the fans, and this fan in the crowd is saying, what's going on out here? And you got this other fan who's on the other team, and he's like, oh, this is great. I'm having a great time, Jim. Like, he's gotten so fucking weird. It blows my mind, man.
Someone had a theory that he got a couple wrong, those calls that he would do, like his niche, and he sort of got embarrassed and like went away from it. But then other people were saying like the broadcast or the producers didn't want him to do that anymore, which I don't understand why they wouldn't. That was his bread and butter. But yeah, I mean, his whole thing in the beginning, if you liked him especially, was he broke down the X's and O's very well. So who knows what it really is? It could also, because other people were saying like it could be that he is a little more detached. He's not studying film like he was when he was in the league. So like looks are a little bit different. Defenses, I mean, the defenses, base defenses don't change, but what they do out of the base defense can change drastically in 3-4 years when you're out of the league for that long. Offenses as well. So I don't know. It's just I need the baseline Tony Romo experience to be way better than it was, because even when I disliked him from the jump, the baseline experience was way better than this.
Yeah.
These last 2 years have been really bad for him.
Yeah, and like I said, the juxtaposition of going directly from Greg Olsen, who's like just incredible right now, to the wacky just guy you don't know what he's saying half the time.
Yeah.
There is, one last thing that I think I wanted to discuss is and I think it's been a huge talking point just overall, is the state of the referees. Because Frank, I mean, like, look, here's the thing. I think they missed calls for both teams. And I definitely don't think they obviously were rigged or anything like that. Or the NFL had some sort of agenda or anything. But all I'm asking for, and this, like, just consistency.
Yep.
Like, you don't have to get every call right. when Devonta Smith, he catches the football and is doing this. First of all, Shanahan should have challenged, right? He almost immediately. He should have been like, okay, something's not, or at least call a timeout, have them take a look, and then challenge if need be, but do something, because that's a clear signal like, hey, hurry up. I don't know if I caught that. You're not going to get that every time. A missed hold. Holding happens almost on every single play. You can't call it every time or the game would take 8 hours. Block in the back, right? A ref is watching a guy going out of bounds. The block in the back happens. No one sees it. For example, on that Sky Moore punt, that punt return that set them up, right? They missed a very clear block in the back. You're not going to be perfect. But for the love of God, be consistent. Don't give people reasons to think that you're influencing the game one way or the other, where you give Patrick Mahomes a very generous roughing the passer call versus Joe Burrow, or Joe Burrow intentional grounding, and then Patrick Mahomes spikes a ball into the ground almost the same way, and that's not called. Like, all I'm asking for is just consistency and better referees, obviously.
Well, and there was another play. It wasn't the same game, but that Devonta Smith call where Shanahan would have had to challenge that to get it overturned. There was a play that went in favor of the Bengals. I forgot exactly what happened. I don't know if it was a drop pass or what, but they overturned it. They didn't have them challenge it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, at what point do we draw the line as to when we're having coaches challenge and when the eye in the sky is saying, oh, no, that was the wrong call. Let's just reverse it and make it right. That was a little bit strange, too. The only one that I don't even want to say I disagree, because I think it's weird. I agree with you. The consistency needs to happen. But you mentioned roughing the passer as one of those. I don't know if that's a consistency thing. I think the way it's written and the way the refs have to call it, that has to be revisited. Because I do think they're making the right calls in the way that the league has now written the rules and what's agreed upon. I just don't agree with the rules themselves. Like the body weight landing is so fucking weird because, okay, let's say let's live in a world where the body weight thing can actually happen. Like, you can control that level of momentum that you have, and you could get your body to the side and not land on them. Okay, fine. But another way to combat that then is if you can't do that, is to sort of ragdoll the quarterback. They call that pass interference too. If you do that too hard. So it's like, what do you expect these players to do? Because if you remember, Jack, this was I think sort of at the inception of our podcast, back when we were the Corked Up podcast, one of my biggest complaints with roughing the passer was a lot of these outside linebackers or defensive ends are like 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", and when they're going in to tackle a quarterback, the quarterback sometimes starts to crumble up, and they can't change their trajectory once they're already going to tackle, which would have been the chest, but the quarterback goes low, and now it's helmet to helmet, and you get the call. And it's like there has to be a concession that you cannot change your momentum in the middle of you tackling somebody. It's literally not possible.
Yeah.
And something has to be written in there. I know people want to get away from the intention behind something, because then you never really know. But something like that, I think is pretty clear, especially with the body weight thing. Like, when have you ever seen a tackle anywhere on the field, whether it's a quarterback or not, where someone tried to harm someone while they were tackling them using their body weight? I've seen people be sort of like the asshole big brother and push off of them. You know what I mean? Instead of pushing off the ground, literally push off the player. That can be called, okay, that's unsportsmanlike conduct. But that whole rule is weird. On one hand, I get you're trying to protect quarterbacks from 300-pound men laying on them, but that's just the name of the game at some point. They're tackling you. You're being tackled by a 300-pound guy when you get sacked.
The one that I think can stay in terms of body weight is when a guy sort of launches himself, leaves his feet, wraps up, and then sort of drives him to the ground. But that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about a defensive end blows past a right tackle, hits him in the chest, and what do you want? You want to just hold him? Just stop.
That's what I mean.
Just stop. No.
we've seen defensive players literally. I mean, you think about like when in youth football, when you're tackling against a tackling dummy to learn how to tackle, it's literally a textbook play. They have their shoulder to the chest, helmet to the side, and they're tackling them to the ground. And like to your point, I do agree. If you launch, if you move, if you jump in the air, then sure, call that may be something you're trying to get out of the game. And I think the reason is because if you launch and then it's helmet to helmet, that makes it that much worse. So you want to completely get that out to avoid that. Get it. The other stuff is asinine to me.
The most egregious one was the Vikings call on the Giants when I don't remember who the pass rusher was, but like he hits Daniel Jones and then sort of like throws him to the side because he doesn't want to land on him. That was the whole thing, and they still called it.
And they still called it, yeah.
But no, man, like all from this game, all I want moving forward is just consistency. Like if you're gonna be bad for both teams. You can't call intentional grounding on Joe Burrow and then not call it on Patrick Mahomes. You can't do that because and listen, I understand the refs. It was the right call what the refs were doing when they let an entire play run and then cancel it out because like they're like the clock started and it shouldn't have stopped. Like I understand that, but like the effort that was put in where the guy was just like, all right, hey, and then just let the play. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like it's such a bad look. And then of course they get the holding play that shouldn't have happened and to help the Chiefs out. And in the end, whatever. But I just don't like when games are decided like that at the end. And granted, I'm not saying that late hit was not a late hit.
Oh, that was definitely a late hit. That was the correct call.
You can't be doing that. But they also missed 2 holding calls on the same play. If you go back and watch, Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson were both being held in that play, like hands to the face, grabbing, like tackling, like I don't like if you're gonna swallow the flag. Do it. Just do it for both sides.
Yeah, and you know what though, that's I'm right there with you when it comes to the consistency. That's my biggest thing as well. And another example that we've used before is I very seldom complain about a baseball umpire if he's calling it 2 inches outside if it's for both teams. That's just your strike zone for the day. You have to adapt now. As long as it's consistent, you're consistently doing that, cool. But to your point, that changes the whole game when it's not being refereed the same on both sides. And again, I don't get into it's fixed and they had money on the game. I don't think that is a thing. Or people think the NFL is rigged. There's too many people at play. There's too many cooks in the kitchen to ever fix something that big. It is what it is. Someone would be telling already. Like it's not how it works. But the time to really let the boys play, as they say, it is the playoffs. Don't call some of the holds on the outside. I mean, if you remember, that was the Patriots strategy against the Rams way back when. We are going to get physical and we're going to make the referees make these calls, and they're not going to because it's the fucking Super Bowl and they don't want to take over the game. And it's like, say what you will about that strategy, but I think both teams should be going in on that. We're going to be as aggressive as possible. Our corners are going to do insane bump and run coverage. Our offensive linemen are going to hold a little bit more than usual. And let's just see what happens. And if you're a referee, it would have to be like, I don't remember who it was even on. It may have been the Chiefs or the Bengals. My memory's failing me, but there was like a clear crossbar holding that's like, okay, you got to call that one. But if you're holding the shoulder pads a little bit, maybe you hit the face mask a little, you let those go because this is the AFC Championship. These are the NFC Championship games. You know what I mean? Like you can let that go. But yeah, the fact that some were called, some weren't. They felt a little bit over their head to a point where if everything just wasn't called, I think no one would have had any complaints.
Right, and that's kind of my point. Is like they don't give those people, those conspiracy theorists, ammunition about thinking that the thing is fixed because sometimes it feels like it. Because you're just the calls just aren't adding up, right? There's not makeup calls like there is in basketball. Like, oh, hey, I fucked that one up, and shout out to LeBron James for the absolute greatest meltdown I've ever seen. That was still fucking hilarious to me. But I think that kind of covers everything we wanted to go over in regards to the NFC and AFC championship games. Feels weird that there's only one game left, and then we're right back into the offseason. It feels like Frank and I were just doing this podcast like not too long ago. So, but But I got to be honest. I want to get past the Super Bowl and I want to start getting into draft conversation. Obviously, the Senior Bowl is taking place right now. Luke Getsy's coaching. We saw pictures of Luke Getsy and Matt Eberflus, Ryan Poles, Ian Cunningham, all kind of hanging out, chilling, watching the games a little bit, watching some practices, seeing who's who. That gigantic offensive tackle from Ohio State with the record wingspan. Maybe that guy will be available to the Bears. Yeah, we'll see what kind of more, see what more Bears news comes out. If it does, we're going to get to our Super Bowl picks this week. If you guys were kind of waiting for that to happen this week, sorry. Probably should have mentioned that we were going to do it this week, and we'll get into it next week. We still got a lot of time to talk about. Full disclosure, Frank, I'm going to have to be rooting for the Eagles at the very least because I can't have Matt Nagy winning a Super Bowl the year after we fired him. Can't have that.
That's fair. But I also, if there was ever a time where I really enjoyed this week break, it's this Super Bowl because I need that receiving core to be healthy. I want both teams to go in there as close to max health as possible. You got another week for Pat Mahomes to rest the high ankle sprain because I can't have another Niners Eagles game. And that was awful. And again, no dog in the race. I did say that the Eagles could blow them out, but fuck me. That was just a boring game.
Give us a good game. Give us a good game. That's all. And hey,
but if anyone listen,
first Super Bowl, 2 black quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Right. Cool.
Yeah. Hey, and listen, if anyone could do it, even on a high ankle sprain and the subpar receiving core, it's fucking Patty. That motherfucker is a magician, man.
I will say the storyline, and we're going to talk a lot more in depth about this next week. We're going to really break down the Super Bowl. I'm kind of hoping no Bears news really breaks because I just sort of want to talk about the Super Bowl just all episode because, obviously biggest game of the year. A lot of interesting storylines.
I agree.
For sure in this game. And I think some legacies could be made for certain players. And we'll talk about that next week. That's a little tease for you. A little tease to come back next week. Like I said, we'll see if there's something Bears related. Maybe a trade happens. Maybe the Bears get T. Higgins. We just spend an hour and a half talking about that and then 10 minutes talking about the Super Bowl. That could happen.
Fuck yeah. That's what's going to happen.
But we appreciate you guys listening as always. This has been the Bear With Us podcast. I am Jack. He is Frank. We will talk to you guys next week. Sorry we didn't talk about the Pro Bowl. I know a lot of you guys were disappointed about that.
Listen, if you are excited about the Pro Bowl,
come on. You're Tyler Huntley's family.
Come on.
Yeah, that's about right. Thank you guys. We'll talk to you next week.
Later, Jackie. Later, everybody.
Everybody love everybody.